G'day guys, and welcome to part 2 of the ideal load. In part 1 of the ideal load, we spoke briefly about the overall concept of load, what it is and how it affects our athletes. In this episode, we're going to discuss the correct manipulation of training variables to provide the ideal load and elicit peak performance across the season. So how do we achieve the ideal load? If we have a look back at the general adaptation syndrome diagram, we can see there is an optimal point at which the timing of our training stimulus should occur in order to ensure maximal gains are made. This is at the point of supercompensation. If the timing of the training stimulus is too soon, we'll enter a state of overtraining. So how do we know if we're applying our training stimulus at the right time? This is where periodization comes into our programs. But what is periodization? Periodization is the process of dividing the annual training plan into a series of manageable phases to elicit peak performance at planned time points throughout the season, such as finals. Here in this example, the annual plan is broken into phases relative to important time points of the season. Now we've broken this annual plan into pre-season, in-season and off-season. This is a common breakdown of the year for team sports such as football, cricket, netball, basketball, etc. These sports often have a competitive season lasting around 6 months, with a pre-season of 3 to 4 months and an off-season of 4 to 8 weeks. Within these phases, there are distinct blocks of training that focus on improving particular athletic attributes of our athletes. These blocks are known as macro cycles and might last anywhere from 3 to 8 weeks, but it's completely up to you as the coach to decide how long these macro cycles last for. Within our macro cycles, we have smaller blocks of training known as microcycles. These smaller blocks typically last about a week. It's often convenient to have your microcycles last for a week. It's then easy to break up your specific days of training. It's important to have these distinct phases and blocks of training so we can carefully plan the season to ensure our athletes' performance is peaking at the appropriate time points. Within these blocks, we can now start to manipulate the intensity, duration, volume and frequency of the sessions to provide enough stimulus to evoke a response, as well as allowing for enough recovery to ensure the appropriate adaptation is made. It's worth quickly noting here that all athletes will respond to the same training session differently, and that without measuring the effects of the session, such as with wearable technology, there should be an element of understanding of the different requirements of your athletes. You will invariably have athletes that are at different levels of fitness and that are better suited to different aspects of your sessions. So be sure to employ your intuitiveness as a coach. So what does the manipulation of training variables across a season look like? In this example, we've planned out both the pre-season and in-season phases of a team sport. The blue line represents the total weekly volume, the red line represents the planned weekly intensity, and the green line represents the desired performance level, or the preparedness of your athletes. This plan has a total of 38 weeks, with the first 16 weeks comprising the pre-season phase. In this phase, there is a consistent increase in the weekly volume with planned recovery every 4th week. These recovery weeks are depicted by the drop in volume and maintenance of intensity. As we move into the competitive season to account for the residual fatigue from competition and training, the weekly volume gradually decreases across the period. This is to avoid the athletes becoming overtrained. As discussed in part 1, the recovery is just as important as the training stimulus. While the weekly volume decreases across the competitive season, the weekly intensity is gradually increased. This allows the athletes to continue to develop the important athletic attributes such as speed, power and strength across the course of the season. Of course, you will find structures and plans that work best for you, your athletes and your coaches, so don't be afraid to experiment a little with the manipulation of your training loads. For more in-depth information on periodization, we recommend these 3 books: High Performance Training for Sports by Joyce and Lewindon, Super Training by Verhoshkansky, and Periodization by Bomper and Half. We hope you enjoyed this episode of The Ideal Load. Stay tuned for part 3, where we will discuss how to effectively monitor your training loads using different technologies and methodologies that are easily implemented. We hope you enjoyed.